Big 12 Commissioner Brett Yormark made sure to let the world know his conference remains open for business. What, if anything, does that mean for the Gonzaga Bulldogs?
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Wednesday and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by FanDuel. Folks, make every moment more. As the playoffs are winding down, the sports stop sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus every single day. That's right. There's something for everybody every day, all summer long. So visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Well, it is WCC Wednesday today, so we are going to talk about all of the WCC stars playing in Summer League, including the 5 Gonzaga Bulldogs. We're also going to talk Zach Edey. He dominated in his first performance with the Memphis Grizzlies in Summer League. We're going to talk about what that means for Brandon Clark. We're also going to talk about what that might mean for traditional back-to-the-basket bigs like, Drew Timme, and perhaps a changing of the guard at the NBA level. But we lead today's show talking once again about conference realignment, because the Big 12 media days are taking place right now ahead of the 2024 college football season. Of course, the Big 12 media days were primarily dominated by conversation about the newcomers joining the Big 12 conference, the 4 corner schools from the former Pac-12 in Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado, and Utah, as well as the recent departures of Texas and Oklahoma as they head to the SEC. However, there were some comments about continued realignment, the future of college athletics, and not a lot of very specific quotes in that area other than Yormark saying, we're going to continue to evaluate things and look to the future and things are changing rapidly, et cetera, et cetera. He did say, however, and I'm pulling this quote from Dennis Dodd of CBS, who's a college football reporter for them. He tweeted a direct quote from Yormark that says, "We are exploring all options. 2 years later, I guess you could say we are still open for business." And in Dennis Dodd's tweet specifically, he tweeted that. He tweeted that it was said by Brett Yormark. And then he tweeted Gonzaga FSU ? That is, of course, Dennis Dodd's adding to the quote. That is not him saying anything specifically about the quotes from Brett Yormark. I think it's somewhat notable that a college football reporter would mention Gonzaga in this conversation. I'll speak very quickly on the Florida State side of things. They're not going to the Big 12. That is done. Conversation over. Florida State is either going to the SEC or the Big 10, or they are just staying in the sinking ship that is the ACC. They are not jumping to the Big 12. It is not going to happen. I can almost guarantee it. But obviously the Gonzaga conversation has been prevalent. The connections between Gonzaga and the Big 12 have been happening for many years now. At this point, they go dormant and then they come back, and then they go dormant and then they come back. And to be clear, this is not a statement by Yormark that should be taken to mean much other than he responded to a question about whether they are continuing to look to expand the conference and basically said, we're exploring all options. And not basically, that's exactly what he said. We are exploring all options. There's not any reason for a conference commissioner to outright shut down any kind of changes or alterations or movements in the future. It doesn't make sense from a PR perspective for a commissioner to say, we are done, we're not making any changes, we are locked in right now. That doesn't mean they won't do it. Some commissioners will do that, and they may mean it. But it is not a good idea in the modern college athletics landscape to, in any way, shape, or form, say, we're going to stand pat. You have to always be evolving and always willing to evolve and change and adapt and alter your plans. It has to be a part of the plan. The plan has to be set and willing to adjust it constantly. Otherwise, you're going to fall flat on your face. There is a very obvious example of that for people who are West Coast sports fans who just watched it happen when the Pac-12 crumbled, because when they were faced with opportunities to potentially expand, when they had opportunities to add schools like BYU or reportedly bigger schools like Texas and Oklahoma and other programs to build and expand the Pac-12 and move east, they chose not to do it. And now they don't exist, or they exist in just two schools, Oregon State and Washington State, who are scrambling to do whatever they can to piece this thing back together, but it will never be the same. It will not be what it was before. And while there are a lot of people to blame and a lot of factors that cause that to happen, ultimately being unwilling to adapt and grow and evolve caused the downfall of the Pac-12. So for the Big 12, who clearly finds themselves behind the Big 10 and the SEC, they have to be willing to evolve and adapt and adjust. And clearly they have been. They added 4 schools this last calendar year in Central Florida, Cincinnati, Houston, and BYU. This year, they added 4 more, as we mentioned, the corner schools, Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado, Utah. They lost 2 in that process in Texas and Oklahoma, but this is a conference willing to make those moves, willing to expand westward, willing to add programs that maybe people didn't expect they'd be willing to add. And that's why it doesn't mean nothing for Gonzaga. The overall update may not mean much. And I say that because the 2 facts that this potentially kind of indicates are 2 facts we already knew. Gonzaga is interested in going to the Big 12. We already knew that. There's no change there. And Brett Yormark is interested in adding Gonzaga to the Big 12. That's not a change either. That's not new information. So this is not presenting us with anything new other than the Big 12 is still willing to consider options to expand. Brett Yormark in particular considers the conference open for business. He is interested in adding a basketball-only school to further stamp this conference as the best basketball conference in the country. Gonzaga is still interested in joining the Big 12. There's no reason for that to be new. We didn't get an update. That would be a weird press release. Hey, yeah, we still want to join the Big 12. That's not how it's going to happen. But if anything, the recent changes in the WCC have probably made Gonzaga feel even more urgent to get out of the conference. Gonzaga doesn't want added games to their conference schedule. Mark Few made it very clear in his recent presser when asked about Washington State and Oregon State joining the conference. He said, that's 2 more games that we don't get for non-conference. That squeezes our non-conference schedule. That's disappointing to us. That's not exactly what he said, but that's what he said. I mean, that's what he meant. It was pretty clear that he is not happy losing non-conference games because these programs have been added. He said when asked about Grand Canyon and Seattle U that he hasn't even thought about it, which I believe him. To be fair, he doesn't have to think about that yet, but I don't think his thoughts about it when he does have them are going to be particularly happy. The WCC is also expected to get rid of the double bye in the WCC tournament, something that Gonzaga pushed for and wanted and advocated for. It also seems likely that the way that revenue sharing is going to happen with the amount of teams that make the NCAA tournament and how far they go and wins and all that stuff, that's probably going to change and be less favorable to Gonzaga. So a lot of the things that they have advocated for, moves that they have helped encourage the WCC to make, in part because they threatened to leave for the Mountain West about a half decade ago. When that happened and the WCC made concessions, a lot of those concessions are what are starting to get rolled back. And I think that's intentional for a couple of reasons. One, everybody knows, including WCC Commissioner Stu Jackson, that Gonzaga is looking at the Big 12, has been in contact with the Big 12. And if you have to figure out the best way to make sure your conference survives. And pandering to a team that may leave your conference at the expense of other teams that are currently in your conference is just not a sustainable option long term. So the WCC has said, hey, we're gonna roll back some of this stuff. We're gonna even the playing field a little bit more. We're gonna do things that make the teams that aren't Gonzaga and St. Mary's happy, because making Gonzaga happy right up until the day they leave is not going to help us long term. And I'm not saying that Gonzaga and WCC are at odds with each other or that they hate each other or anything like that. It's just that they're operating looking at the bigger picture, and so is Gonzaga. They both are. And the bigger picture for both parties is eventually a separation. That's what is kind of the expectation, I think. Whether that is the Big 12 or not kind of remains to be seen. And this conversation didn't change that much. And I think the key here remains the key that it was last year around this time when these talks picked up and then died down pretty much as soon as they picked up. The Big 12 presidents and athletic directors, the people who vote on conference realignment, are not in a hurry to add Gonzaga. They just added 8 schools in a 2-year period of time, a gain of 6 in totality after losing 2 other ones. They have a new media rights deal. They're looking at a title sponsor. They're looking at other types of corporate sponsorships. There's a lot of things happening in the Big 12 right now that take precedent over adding Gonzaga. And I think the key part of all of this is that they don't feel like Gonzaga is a school that you need to add right now. If they didn't add the four corner schools, somebody else would have added them because they would have needed a conference. So you go strike while the iron's hot. You go get a great football program in Utah. You go get a great basketball program in Arizona. Like, you strike when you can. But they don't feel like they need to add Gonzaga. They can wait 2 years, see how this plays out, see how the landscape of college athletics changes, see what the revenue share looks like, the TV deal looks like, how the scheduling looks, all of that stuff. See how it looks, reassess in 2 years, because in their mind, Gonzaga is still going to be there. They're still going to be waiting. Gonzaga doesn't have the leverage in their minds to be a team that we have to force into the conference now, or else we lose the opportunity to add them. They also don't view it as like, oh no, if we lose Gonzaga, we lose Gonzaga. Like, they're going to be fine with that. So I think that that's the reason that we're not seeing movement here, is that nobody feels the urgency. Like, we have to add Gonzaga now, or we risk losing them. They're okay losing Gonzaga. And Gonzaga's they're not going anywhere else. The Big East has quieted. Their new media deal has probably quieted any rumors for the Gonzaga to go to the Big East. We haven't heard any significant updates in that regard. I don't think we will. Yes, the Pac-12 and the Mountain West are eventually going to come to some level of relationship with each other, whether it's a reverse merger, whether it's the Pac-2 poaching 6 or 7 schools from the Mountain West, whatever it may be. And there's a reasonable chance Gonzaga gets an invitation to whatever that becomes. But that's not as appealing as the Big 12. So for Gonzaga, they're not going to jump ship unless they think that they absolutely have no chance of the Big 12, or they're landing somewhere comparable like the Big East. If they don't feel those options are there, they're just going to wait. And so the Big 12 can afford to wait. That's how they feel, and I think they're right in assessing that situation correctly. It's unfortunate for Gonzaga. It puts them in a holding pattern that could last years at this point. So yes, Brett Yormark says they're open for business. He wants Gonzaga. Gonzaga wants Brett Yormark in the Big 12, but there are still hurdles standing in the way. And unless the Big 12 feels the urgency to make a move right away, which I don't know what would cause that to happen, barring a Big East suddenly getting involved, this may not be a situation that gets resolved or altered anytime soon. Going to switch gears here. Talk about Zach Edey, Purdue star, played his first game in the NBA Summer League with the Memphis Grizzlies. He looked fantastic, and he did it without clogging up the lane the way that many people thought that he would. We're going to talk about what that might mean for other bigs like Zach Edey, including Drew Timme. We're also going to talk about what it might mean for Brandon Clark, all coming up in just a second. Right after I tell you about today's sponsor, FanDuel. I love sports. You all love sports. We all love sports so much that we never, ever want them to stop. But the playoffs have wound down for the NBA and the NHL, and we're getting fewer games. The sports are not sportsing the way that we want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime that I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus every single day. That's right. There's something for everybody every day all summer long. If you want to support Coach Mark Few and watch the Olympics with a vested interest, currently Team USA has minus 470 odds to take home the gold medal. Or maybe you're a believer in Team Canada. Kelly Olynyk, team captain over there, Andrew Nemhard, playing for Team Canada. If you think they can clip the U.S., win that gold medal, their odds are at plus 1,100. Either way, head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, folks, still Edey Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. Moving on to segment 2 here, talking about Zach Edey, a name that many of you were kind of probably hoping to never hear again after he went 3-0 in his career against the Gonzaga Bulldogs. But we are going to talk about Zach Edey, his performance with the Memphis Grizzlies, what it means for traditional back-to-the-basket big men, what it means for Brandon Clark, his new teammate in Memphis. If you missed this, Monday evening, Zach Edey made his summer league debut playing for the Memphis Grizzlies, who made him the 9th overall pick in the 2024 NBA draft. And it was high. People were expecting Edey to go in the late first round, the 20 to 25, 30 range. Some people even thought he was going to be a second-round pick. We started to see some momentum for him potentially being a mid-first-round pick, maybe even a lottery pick. But he went 9th overall to the Memphis Grizzlies. There's a lot of chatter, a lot of talk, because Zach Edey is a polarizing prospect. On one hand, he was a two-time National Player of the Year, a singularly dominant force in college basketball. Love him or hate him, I know many of you probably feel similarly about Zach Edey. There is no denying that he was dominant while at Purdue. But the style that he plays doesn't translate to the modern NBA. He's not a switchable big defensively. He's not a guy who spaces the floor. It's things we've talked about at length on the podcast, specifically when evaluating Drew Timme's NBA draft prospects. It's going to be the same conversation we have about Graham Ike. It's the reason Graham Ike hasn't showed up on mock drafts, because he is a low post scorer who doesn't space the floor. He can a little bit, but not consistently, and is a defender that doesn't appear to have the lateral mobility to be switchable at the next level. That is the conversation around the Drew Timmes of the world, the Armando Baycots of the world, the Oscar Sheboys of the world, the Kofi Coburns of the world. So many players who dominate in college basketball and who don't succeed at the next level, or are not given opportunities to succeed at the next level because teams are evaluating floor spacing and defensive switchability, and those are just not traits that those particular players have. Zach Edey is the biggest, quite literally, example of this, because he's so big and he's so tall and he's so strong and he's so dominant on the block, but he doesn't possess those other skills. And so the naysayers said it's not going to work. The fans, the supporters said he is so dominant, he forces you to alter your defense and you want to get him out on the floor. Even if there are deficiencies, he is still going to be an impactful and good NBA player. We all know, or should know, that judging a player off of one summer league game is too early. For better or worse, player has a terrible first game, it doesn't mean much. Good first game doesn't mean much. And I still believe those things are true. But what Zach Edey showed on Monday night in an overtime loss to the Utah Jazz firmly, in my mind, depicts a player who is capable of being a legitimate long-time contributor in the NBA. Zach Edey finished the game with 14 points, 15 rebounds, and 4 blocks. He was not going up against just traditional summer league rosters where most of the guys that you're facing aren't going to be in the NBA. He matched directly up against Walker Kessler, former Auburn big man, who spent the last 2 seasons with the Utah Jazz, and over those last 2 seasons has averaged 2.4 blocks per game, which is second in the league. Walker Kessler is not only an established starting NBA center, he is one of the best defensive centers on the planet. Similarly to how Zach Edey dominated Donovan Clingan. It's like, what more do you want from him? He dominated a guy that you're all projecting to be a good defender at the NBA level. Now he did it against a guy who's already been a good defender at the NBA level. Walker Kessler finished this game with 8 points, 8 boards, and 5 blocks. Edey beat him. More points, more rebounds, 1 less block. And one of Walker Kessler's blocks, by the way, was on Edey. Edey got the rebound, turned around, and just dunked right in his face. Zach Edey also had the game-tying tip-in. Utah fouled up 3, which is what you're supposed to do. It's kind of odd to do in a summer league game, but hey, whatever. I think it was Jake LaRavia made the first free throw, missed the second one intentionally. Zach Edey tipped it in because he's that freaking big and sent that game into overtime. This was a tremendous performance from Zach Edey. The main things that he did that I think are really important in the context of Drew Timme and Brandon Clark are that he played away from the rim. A lot of people think, well, yeah, Zach Edey's going to be great if you just feed him the ball like Purdue did. That's not what Memphis did in this game. He didn't just go sit on the block, clog up the paint, get entry passes from guards on Memphis's roster and go to work on the block. That's not how this game played out. Zach Edey was away from the rim. He was at the free throw line. He was setting screens. He was in the pick and roll. He was facilitating. He was making passes, making reads, giving dribble handoffs, generally facilitating the offense. The fact that Zach Edey can do that is proof that he is going to have an NBA career, because that's the role that people didn't think he could have. And that's where I want to talk about Drew Timme. Drew Timme is not ever going to be as impactful on the defensive end of the floor as Zach Edey. Ever. And that's fine. That's fine. You're willing to play drop coverage with Zach Edey on your roster because of what he brings as a shot blocker, as a rebounder, and as a low post scorer, rim runner, offensive rebounder, all that stuff. With Drew Timme, that trade-off is probably not worth it as much. But Drew does not just need to. Drew can thrive in an NBA offense in roles outside of just getting on the block, posting up, getting the ball, using his footwork to score. He can do that very well. But you're not looking for him to do that because NBA rosters just don't funnel their offense through bigs on the block like they used to. But if you pull Drew away from the rim, you put him at the free throw line, you run dribble handoffs off of him, You do side-to-side ball screen actions. You let him turn and facilitate and make the right read, look for backdoor cutters, heck, even drive from the free throw line if he gets a defender on skates, gets him in the air, puts the ball on the deck. He can do all of that. The things that we saw from Zach Edey offensively in this game are all skills that Drew Timme very clearly has. Drew Timme is about 7 inches shorter than Zach Edey, has a much shorter wingspan, and will not be the effective rim protector that Zach Edey is. And that is why his stock is not nearly as high as Edey's. This is more of a compliment to Edey than it is an insult to Timme. But I do think that reevaluating how we look at Drew's potential offensive impact at the NBA level, he is more capable of being a valuable offensive weapon in the NBA than I think a lot of scouts and general managers are giving him credit. And watching Edey's tape in this game is an indication of why. Until the defense ticks up, until he proves the foot injuries behind him, the lateral mobility is there, and he can at least be a passable, switchable defender, or at least is so good offensively that you're willing to play him in drop coverage, I'm still not sure the NBA career is there for Drew, unfortunately. But I wanted to highlight why I think this could work and why Drew's game against Utah, it's just one game, like we said, really kind of merits extra consideration for the Drew Timmes of the world. I'll also mention quickly, we're running out of time in the segment here, Brandon Clarke is going to play a valuable role for Memphis. I think Zach Edey is going to start alongside Jaren Jackson Jr. Clark's going to come off the bench. Memphis likes having Clarke come off the bench anyway. But I think for Edey, since he is going to be used in drop coverage, and since Memphis cannot play drop coverage against every team every minute of every game, they're going to use Brandon Clarke a lot. He's going to be used as a more athletic big, a smaller big, but one who is capable to be a switchable defender. I think we're going to see Brandon Clarke have arguably the best season of his career next year, because I think Zach Edey is going to help him in the sense that it creates a more defined role for Brandon Clarke, and I think he's going to thrive in that role. Having an offseason, being fully healthy certainly helps as well. Very excited to see what Brandon Clarke can do in year 4 for him with the Memphis Grizzlies. Well, we're going to continue our conversation about Summer League, closing out the show, talking about every former WCC member who is set to participate, including the 5 former Zags who are on Summer League rosters. All that coming up in just a second. All right, folks, segment 3. Still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, still talking NBA Summer League here as we transition to the final segment of the show. Very simple. We're just going to talk about the WCC players, former WCC stars who are in Summer League this year. We got 5 from Gonzaga. We'll talk about them. We got 4 from St. Mary's next on the list. We'll talk about them. We got some Washington State guys to talk about. I know they weren't in the WCC, but still some names that fans will recognize. A couple from San Francisco, from Pepperdine, Santa Clara, Portland as well. We'll start with the Zags. We talked about this on yesterday's show. For those of you who missed it, Tuesday's show, definitely check it out. We have a little bit more in-depth on these guys, and we'll get more into them as we actually start getting some data for how they're performing in Summer League. But there are 5 former Zags who are participating in Summer League, 2 of them with the defending champion Boston Celtics. That is Anton Watson, who was, of course, selected 54th in the most recent NBA draft, and Killian Tillie. For those of you who missed this, Killian Tillie has signed with the Boston Celtics for Summer League. He is healthy, been undergoing a lot of injury rehabilitation the last couple of years, has been in Spokane, has been in France, but now he is back on the basketball court, really hoping he can get a chance to make it in the NBA after having a productive 54-game career with Memphis over the last 2 years. Julian Strawther will participate in Summer League with the Denver Nuggets after a strong rookie season, although he had some injuries last year. Drew Timme with the Toronto Raptors, started with the Sacramento Kings, had a 10-point, 10-rebound double-double in 21 minutes. In his only game with Sacramento is now with Toronto. Malachi Smith is with Killian Tillie's old team, the Memphis Grizzlies. Did not play in that game against Utah. He just signed with the team very recently, but hopefully he'll get some nice run with Memphis in the coming weeks. Looking at the other programs in the WCC and where their players are participating, starting with the Portland Pilots, Moses Wood, who spent last year with the Washington Huskies, but was previously with the Portland Pilots. He is with the Atlanta Hawks in Summer League. Tyler Robertson, who had a prolific career at the University of Portland, felt like he was there for 6 or 7 years, transferred from Eastern Washington. Really, really good player. He is with the Washington Wizards. I don't know if he's going to be a guy who sticks in the NBA, but man, he is a really talented player. I look forward to seeing what he does with his pro career. Moving on to Santa Clara, you got Parker Braun, the older brother of Christian Braun, who is a member of the Denver Nuggets. Parker Braun transferred to Kansas after kind of following in his younger brother's footsteps to play with the Jayhawks. And then he is signed with the Denver Nuggets in Summer League, following again in his younger brother's footsteps, Christian, who was with the Denver Nuggets, although not in Summer League. We'll see if Parker can stick with Denver in Summer League, teammates with, of course, Julian Strawther. And then Brandin Podziemski. I'd be very surprised if Podziemski plays more than like 1, maybe 2 games with Golden State in the Summer League. He was very good as a rookie last year, one of the best rookies in the entire league. Very rarely do good rookies play much, if at all, the following Summer League. So I wouldn't expect to see much, if at all, of playing time for Podziemski with the Warriors. St. Mary's has four guys in Summer League. Tommy Kusi, blast from the past there. He's been in Summer League the last couple of years. Really, really good point guard. He was a walk-on who developed into one of the best players in St. Mary's basketball history. He is with the Los Angeles Lakers. Alex Ducas just recently graduated from St. Mary's. He's with Oklahoma City. Logan Johnson, who was not on last year's team, but was there the previous year. WCC Defensive Player of the Year, fantastic defensive, hard-nosed kid, a very good scorer as well. He's with the Phoenix Suns. And then Jordan Ford, who's been briefly in the NBA. I think he played 5 or 6 NBA games last year with the Sacramento Kings, which is where he is at for Summer League as well. Pepperdine has one representative in the one representative in Summer League, that is Maxwell Lewis, 40th pick in not this year's, but the previous year's NBA draft. He was with the Los Angeles Lakers last year and remains with them in Summer League. So him and Tommy Kusi teaming up to make a couple of WCC guys there for the Lakers. Washington State has a trio of guys, again, not former WCC players necessarily. Jalen Wells on last year's Wazoo team was picked in this NBA draft by the Memphis Grizzlies, where he will play in Summer League. He played in that game with Zach Edey, but was quite bad. I think he went like 0 of 9 from the field. He struggled in his first game, but I'm sure he'll be back. Isaac Jones was perhaps the best player for Wazoo last year. He is with Sacramento in the in the Summer League. And then Mo Gee, who's been in the NBA for a couple of years now, but was at Wazoo prior to that. He is in Summer League with the Atlanta Hawks. Closing out the show with the final team here, the Dons of San Francisco. They got a trio of players set to participate in Summer League. 2 of them with the San Antonio Spurs. That's Jamari Bouye, who had such an incredible career on the hilltop with the Dons, has bounced around the NBA, played a few games with Portland, a few games with San Antonio, a few games with Miami. Now he is set to try to make a roster out of camp with the Spurs of San Antonio. He is teammates with his former teammate at San Francisco, Juhan Masalski. Masalski also played at San Diego, so he counts as a Torero and a Don alumni. He is a very talented big man, hasn't gotten a chance in the NBA yet, but has been in Summer League the last couple of years. Him and Bouye team up on the Spurs. And then last, but very certainly not least, the 31st overall pick in the 2024 NBA draft, Jonathan Mogbo out of San Francisco. He is with the Toronto Raptors. Very excited and intrigued to see what his potential NBA career might look like. Hoping to get a chance to watch some Raptors Summer League games because it feels like the front court, the starting center, or the player playing center for Toronto will either be Jonathan Mogbo or Drew Timme. So either way, it's going to be fun to get a chance to watch these Raptors and see how those two guys do as they have a quest to make an NBA roster this upcoming season. It's going to wrap it up for me today here in the Locked On Zags podcast. Folks, thank you so much to those of you who have made this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Hope those of you out in the Pacific Northwest are finding a way to stay cool. I know I'm struggling with that over here, but it is a fun summer, fantastic weekend coming your way. Hopefully you guys all have a blast. We got a couple more shows before we get there, though, so definitely stay checked in here on Locked On Zags. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, as always, go Zags.